Welcome, gentle listener, to another journey through the corridors of time. Tonight, we drift back to the banks of the great Nile River, to an Egypt that existed not in the gleaming halls of legend, but in the dust and sweat of everyday existence. As you settle into comfort, imagine yourself floating above the ancient landscape, watching the sun set over a civilization that has captivated human imagination for millennia. Beneath the golden facade lived millions of ordinary people whose daily struggles and small triumphs shaped the civilization we remember today. Their stories are quieter than those of kings, but no less compelling in their quiet humanity. But tonight, we won't linger long in the shadow of the great pyramids or the golden burial masks that fill our museums. Instead, we'll descend into the narrow streets, the cramped workshops, and the humble homes where most Egyptians actually lived their lives. The Egypt of your imagination, all gleaming temples and mysterious pharaohs, was real, but it was also a thin veneer over a much more complex reality. Tonight, you'll walk in their sandals or more often, their bare feet across burning sand and through narrow alleyways, thick with the scent of bread baking and the sound of hammers on stone. You'll feel the weight of their burdens and understand the rhythm of their days, measured not by grand ceremonies, but by the rising and setting of the sun over the Nile. So close your eyes now, and let the gentle current of history carry you back 3,500 years, to a time when the modern world was unimaginable, and survival itself was a daily victory worth celebrating. Around him, the brickyard hums with activity that would seem chaotic to modern eyes, but follows its own ancient rhythm. Teams of workers dig mud from the riverbank, their bronze tools flashing in the sunlight. Men grunt with effort oxen low as they pull carts loaded with supplies, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of stone being carved for the pharaoh. His latest building project provides a steady percussion to the day's labor. Others mix the mud with straw, their feet sinking deep into the mixture as they tread it like wine grapes. Another misjudges the weight of a stack of bricks and strains his back so severely that he'll be unable to work for days. Days his family will go without income. Cain Wasset's production has slowed despite his best efforts. He thinks of his childhood when he believed he might become a scribe like his uncle, before reality taught him that such dreams belonged to families with connections and resources his could never possess. He thinks of his wife, probably at home now trying to keep their dwelling cool by sprinkling precious water on the earthen floors. And he can see the overseer making notes on his papyrus scroll notes that will determine whether he receives his full day's pay or suffers a reduction that will mean less food on his family's table tonight. Cain Wasset has seen men collapse entirely, their bodies finally rebelling against the impossible demands placed upon them. The streets are crowded with workers returning from their labors, all showing the effects of another day's struggle against the unforgiving environment. They chase each other around vendors selling the day's remaining bread and vegetables, their energy a reminder that even in this harsh environment, life finds ways to assert its joy. The scent of baking bread mingles with the smoke of burning dung and the occasional luxury of roasting fish. Cain Wasset's stomach reminds him that he hasn't eaten since dawn, and the small portion of food waiting at home suddenly seems like a feast. Cain Wasset washes the day's mud from his hands and face, the water turning brown as it cleanses away the evidence of his labor. His wife tends to the cuts and scrapes that accumulate daily, applying honey to the worst wounds and wrapping them with strips of linen torn from their few precious garments. Tomorrow will bring another day identical to today, another battle against heat and exhaustion and the indifferent demands of survival. These are the sounds of human endurance, of a civilization built not by pharaohs and priests, but by countless ordinary people whose names are forgotten, but whose labor shaped the world, ready to face another day in the endless cycle of survival that defines life for the vast majority of ancient Egypt's people. His story is one of quiet heroism, of human dignity maintained in the face of hardship, of the countless small victories that add up to the grand sweep of history. But tonight, he is home, his family is fed, and the great river continues its eternal flow past the city he helps to build, brick by muddy brick. Women balance water jars on their heads as they return from the river, their backs straight despite the weight, their movements graceful through long practice. Still others carry finished bricks to ever-growing stacks that will eventually find their way to construction sites throughout the city. The heat was particularly brutal, and several breaks to seek water have cost him precious time. As he approaches the overseer to receive his pay, he prepares himself for the possibility of reduced wages and what that will mean for his family's evening meal. She takes one look at his appearance, the mud-caked hands, the sun-reddened skin, the exhaustion in his eyes, and begins preparing cool water for him to wash with, and a meal of bread and onions that will have to sustain him until tomorrow has dawned. Everyone knows that the last hours of daylight are their final chance to meet quotas and earn full wages. Cain Wasset pushes through his exhaustion, his movements mechanical but determined. Stories are told, plans are made for tomorrow's tasks, and the bonds that hold the family together are quietly reinforced. These evening hours are what make the daily struggle worthwhile, the promise of shelter, sustenance, and human connection that gives meaning to an otherwise brutal existence. Each brick represents a fraction of a day's pay, and every fraction matters when you're living on the edge of subsistence. Cain Wasset's head pounds with the beginning of heat exhaustion, and his vision sometimes blurs when he stands too quickly. Conversations have long since ceased, replaced by the grim determination of men who understand that tomorrow will bring another identical day, and the day after that, and the day after that, until their bodies finally give out, or they reach too old to keep pace with younger men desperate for work. But there's no respite available, no shaded pavilion where workers can rest, no cool drinks to refresh parched throats. The noise is constant and overwhelming. A scrape of shovels against mud, the thud of bricks being stacked, the crack of overseers' staffs against the backs of workers who move too slowly. As the sun reaches its zenith, work doesn't stop, but it slows. Even the overseers understand that pushing too hard in the midday heat will result in collapsed workers and ruined productivity. This is when the true misery begins for Kamwasid and his fellows. The sand burns their feet with each step, forcing them to dance from one patch of shadow to another. The brick molds are too hot to touch without pain, so they must work with rags wrapped around their hands, making the already difficult task even more cumbersome. The heat creates mirages that shimmer above the sand, turning the familiar landscape into something alien and disorienting. This is when accidents happen. A worker, dizzy from heat and dehydration, stumbles and falls face first into a pile of wet mud. The afternoon stretches endlessly, each hour marked only by the sun's slow movement across the sky. His hands have gone beyond pain into a kind of numbness, continuing to work through muscle memory, while his mind drifts to escape the present misery. As the sun finally begins its descent toward the western hills, the pace of work actually increases rather than decreases. The other workers around him are in similar states of exhaustion. When the overseer finally calls an end to the day's labor, Kamwasid's relief is tempered by the knowledge that he's produced fewer bricks than yesterday. The walk home through Thebes in the evening is a journey through a city very different from the one he traversed that morning. Children who spent the day helping their mothers with household tasks or learning trades from their fathers now play in the narrow streets, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the exhaustion visible on every adult face. The smells of cooking fires drift from doorways as families prepare their evening meals. As he finally pushes through the leather curtain that serves as his door, Kamwasid is greeted by his wife's concerned face. The evening routine is as ritualized as the morning's preparation. The children gather around as the family shares their simple meal, and for a few precious hours, the day's hardships recede into background. As darkness falls over Thebes, Kamwasid lies down on his sleeping mat, his body aching in a dozen places, but his mind finally at peace. The sounds of the city settling into sleep drift through the thin walls. Babies crying, adults murmuring in quiet conversation, the distant barking of dogs and the rustle of wind through palm trees. And in the morning, when the sun rises again over the eastern hills, Kamwasid will rise with it. Now, as you drift deeper into the ancient world, let your mind travel from the dusty brickyards of Thebes to the polished halls of pharaonic power. The transition is not as jarring as you might expect. The same sun that tormented Kamwasid also illuminated the face of one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers, a woman who would defy convention and claim the throne of the pharaohs for herself. Imagine yourself in the year 1479 BCE, standing in the shadows of a great temple as a figure emerges from the inner sanctum. At first glance, you see what appears to be a pharaoh, the traditional false beard of kingship, the elaborate crown, the regalia of divine authority. But look closer, and you begin to notice the subtle differences, the carefully crafted illusion. That allowed Hatshepsut to rule Egypt for 22 years as a king, not a queen. Her story begins not with her own birth, but with the complex web of royal succession that governed ancient Egypt. Born into the 18th dynasty, she was the daughter of Thutmose I, a pharaoh who had expanded Egypt's borders and filled its treasuries with foreign gold. Her childhood was spent in the luxurious but claustrophobic world of the royal palace, where every gesture was choreographed, every relationship calculated, and every day brought new lessons in the art of ruling an empire, not unlike Kemoset's. Children, who would learn their father's trade through necessity, Hatshepsut received an education reserved for the highest echelons of Egyptian society. She learned to read and write hieroglyphs, a skill possessed by perhaps 1% of the population. She studied mathematics, astronomy, and the complex religious rituals that bound the pharaoh to the gods. Most importantly, she learned statecraft, the delicate art of maintaining control over a vast kingdom through a combination of divine authority, political cunning, and careful management of Egypt's powerful priesthood. But despite her exceptional education, Hatshepsut's path to power was far from predetermined. Egyptian royal succession favored males, and even the most capable woman was expected to exercise influence through her relationships with men as wife, mother, or regent. When she married her half-brother Thutmose II, following the royal tradition of keeping power within the family, she seemed destined for the traditional role of royal consort. The palace where Hatshepsut spent her early married life was a world unto itself, a sprawling complex of courtyards, gardens, and chambers that housed hundreds of servants, officials, and hangers-on. The walls were decorated with painted scenes of royal victories and divine favor, their colors still bright after millennia. Gold leaf caught the light from countless oil lamps, and the air was perfumed with incense burned in honor of the gods, who supposedly blessed the royal family. Yet beneath this splendor lay the same human struggles that plagued families throughout Egypt. Hatshepsut's marriage to Thutmose II produced only daughters, a source of private disappointment in a culture that valued male heirs above all else. When Thutmose II died young, possibly from illness, the succession fell to his son by a minor wife, a boy who would become Thutmose III. But the heir was still a child, perhaps no more than 10 years old, and Egypt required a regent to rule in his name. This is where Hatshepsut's story becomes truly extraordinary. Initially, she served as regent exactly as tradition demanded, ruling on behalf of her stepson and preparing him for his eventual ascension to full pharaonic power. Royal inscriptions from this period show her in the traditional pose of regency standing behind the young pharaoh, her hands placed protectively on his shoulders, her face serene and maternal. But something changed during those early years of regency. Perhaps it was the realization that she possessed abilities her stepson lacked. Perhaps it was frustration with the limitations placed on her gender. Or perhaps it was simply the intoxicating effect of wielding absolute power in one of the world's greatest civilizations. Whatever the catalyst, Hatshepsut began to transform herself from regent into pharaoh. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible. At first, royal inscriptions began to show her standing beside Thutmose III rather than behind him, their figures equal in size and dignity. Her titles became more elaborate, incorporating divine epithets traditionally reserved for pharaohs. She began to appear in the false beard of kingship, that curious symbol of pharaonic authority that transformed even the most feminine ruler into a divine masculine figure. The process by which Hatshepsut claimed full pharaonic power reveals the sophisticated political machinery that governed ancient Egypt. She couldn't simply declare herself pharaoh. Such a dramatic break with tradition would have triggered civil war. Instead, she built consensus carefully, winning support from the powerful priesthood of Amun, the military commanders who controlled Egypt's armies, and the bureaucrats who administered its provinces. Her greatest ally in this delicate process was Senenmut, an architect and administrator who rose from humble origins to become one of the most powerful men in Egypt. Some historians suggest the relationship was romantic, though evidence is limited and ambiguous. What's certain is that Senenmut possessed the intelligence and loyalty Hatshepsut needed to navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics. Together, they crafted a narrative that justified her unprecedented claim to pharaonic power. Divine birth stories were commissioned, claiming that the god Amun himself was her father. Religious texts were rewritten to emphasize precedence for female rule. Most cleverly, she presented herself not as a woman breaking with tradition, but as a pharaoh following divine command. The physical transformation that accompanied her political ascension was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hatshepsut's reign. Official portraits show her progression from traditional queen to pharaoh over the course of several years. Early depictions show her in feminine dress, her natural features clearly visible. But as her power grew, these images gave way to increasingly masculine representations, complete with the traditional pharaonic regalia and the false beard that symbolized divine authority. This transformation wasn't merely cosmetic. It reflected a fundamental reimagining of royal identity. Hatshepsut understood that pharaonic power rested not just on political control, but on the ability to embody divine authority in ways that Egyptian society could accept. By presenting herself as a male pharaoh, she preserved the fiction of masculine rule while exercising very real feminine power. The Egypt that Hatshepsut ruled was at the height of its power and prosperity. Tribute flowed in from conquered territories in Nubia and the Levant. Trade routes brought exotic goods from as far away as the mysterious land of Punt, possibly located in modern-day Somalia or Ethiopia. The royal treasuries overflowed with gold, silver, and precious stones that funded massive construction projects throughout the kingdom. But while Egypt prospered, Hatshepsut faced constant challenges to her authority. Traditional pharaohs could rely on military conquest to demonstrate their divine favor and masculine power. Hatshepsut, constrained by her gender and possibly by her own temperament, chose a different path. Her reign was marked more by building projects and trade expeditions than by military campaigns, a choice that some historians interpret as wisdom and others as weakness. Her greatest architectural achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a stunning complex carved into the cliffs west of Thebes. The temple's design was revolutionary. Its clean lines and geometric precision, a departure from the traditional pyramid-style tombs of earlier pharaohs. Even today, its terraced levels and colonnaded halls create an impression of serene power, a fitting monument to a ruler who preferred diplomacy to warfare. The temple walls tell the story of Hatshepsut's reign through carefully crafted reliefs and inscriptions. Scenes of her divine birth share space with depictions of trading expeditions and religious ceremonies. Most famously, the walls record her expedition to Punt, a trading venture that brought back incense trees, exotic animals, and precious metals. To Egypt, these expeditions were presented as religious pilgrimages, blessed by the gods and beneficial to all Egypt. Yet even as Hatshepsut built her monuments and administered her kingdom, the question of succession hung over her reign like a storm cloud. Thutmose III, her stepson and co-ruler, grew from child to young man to mature adult, always waiting in the wings for his chance at full pharaonic power. The relationship between them remains one of the great mysteries of ancient Egyptian history. Some sources suggest they ruled together harmoniously, with Thutmose III gaining experience in military command, while Hatshepsut focused on domestic affairs and religious duties. Others hint at tension, with Thutmose III chafing under the authority of his stepmother and plotting his eventual assumption of sole power. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes, in the complex dynamics of a royal family where personal relationships were inseparable from political calculations. As Hatshepsut aged, the pressures of her unprecedented position began to take their toll. Maintaining the fiction of masculine rule required constant vigilance. Every public appearance had to be carefully choreographed, every official portrait precisely crafted. The weight of the false beard, both literal and metaphorical, grew heavier with each passing year. Her later inscriptions reveal hints of weariness and defensiveness. She repeatedly justified her rule by claiming divine sanction, as if anticipating criticism from future generations. She emphasized her role as protector of Egypt's stability and prosperity, presenting herself as a reluctant ruler who accepted power only at the gods' command. The end of Hatshepsut's reign remains shrouded in mystery. Around 1458 BCE, after 22 years of rule, she simply disappears from the historical record. Some sources suggest she died naturally, possibly from illness or old age. Others hint at a more dramatic ending, with Thutmose III finally asserting his claim to sole power through force or political maneuvering. What followed was perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Hatshepsut's legacy. In the years after her death, many of her monuments were defaced, her name chiseled out of inscriptions, and her images destroyed or altered. For centuries, historians assumed this was evidence of Thutmose III's hatred for his stepmother, revenge for years of humiliation and delayed succession. But modern scholarship has revealed a more complex picture: the destruction of Hatshepsut's monuments was selective and strategic, focusing on those that celebrated her as pharaoh, while leaving intact inscriptions that showed her in traditional feminine roles. Moreover, the destruction began not immediately after her death, but decades later, suggesting it was motivated by political rather than personal considerations. The most likely explanation is that later pharaohs, faced with challenges to their own authority, found Hatshepsut's precedent inconvenient. A successful female pharaoh created a dangerous precedent that other ambitious women might follow. By erasing her memory from official records, they hoped to erase the possibility of future female rule. This systematic attempt to destroy Hatshepsut's legacy makes her rediscovery by modern archaeologists all the more remarkable. In 1903, British Egyptologist Howard Carter found her tomb in the Valley of the Kings, though it had been robbed in antiquity and contained no royal burial. Her mummy was eventually identified in 2007, found in a modest tomb that may have been intended for her wet nurse. The woman revealed by modern forensic analysis was quite different from the idealized pharaoh depicted in official portraits. She was middle-aged at death, possibly in her 50s, with evidence of diabetes and bone cancer. Her teeth showed signs of tooth loss and decay, common ailments in ancient Egypt, but rarely mentioned in royal inscriptions. She was, in short, human, subject to the same physical frailties that afflicted all her subjects, from Kamwaset, the brickmaker, to the highest court officials. Yet for 22 years, this mortal woman wielded the power of the gods themselves, ruling over one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations with intelligence, cunning, and an unshakable belief in her own divine destiny. Her reign was marked by peace, prosperity, and architectural achievement, a stark contrast to the military campaigns and conquests that characterized most pharaonic reigns. As you imagine yourself in the halls of her temple at Dai el-Bahari, surrounded by the whispers of ancient courtiers and the rustle of papyrus scrolls, you can almost feel the weight of her remarkable achievement. In a world where women were expected to exercise power only through their relationships with men, Hatshepsut carved out a space for herself as pharaoh, king, and god. Her story reminds us that even in the most rigid societies, exceptional individuals can find ways to transcend the limitations of their time. The same sun that beat down mercilessly on Kamwaset in the brickyards also illuminated the face of a woman who refused to accept that her gender disqualified her from greatness. And perhaps that is the most soothing lesson of all that throughout history, human beings have found ways to assert their dignity and pursue their dreams, even when the odds seemed impossibly stacked against them. Whether building a civilization one brick at a time or ruling an empire from a throne, the human spirit finds ways to endure, to thrive, and to leave its mark on the world. As sleep beckons, let your mind rest on this image. Hatshepsut in her temple, the false beard of kingship put aside for the night, her face serene in the lamplight as she reviews the day's business of ruling Egypt. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new threats to her unprecedented authority, new demands for the us. Careful balance of power that keeps her kingdom stable. But tonight, she is simply a woman who dared to become pharaoh and succeeded. Asterisk tombs that vanished, the lost necropolises of the Nile. As your mind drifts deeper into the mysteries of ancient Egypt, imagine yourself standing at the edge of the western desert as twilight settles over the Nile Valley. The dying light casts long shadows across the sand, and in those shadows lie secrets that have been buried for millennia entire. Cities of the dead that once rivaled the cities of the living in their grandeur and complexity. Tonight, we journey into the realm of Egypt's lost necropolises, those vast cemeteries that once dotted the landscape from the Yawns Delta to the cataracts of Aswan, while the pyramids of Giza and the tombs of the Valley of the Kings capture our imagination. They represent only a fraction of the burial sites that once served Egypt's dead. Countless others have vanished beneath the sand, their locations forgotten, their treasures scattered by time and human ambition. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was merely a transition, a doorway to an eternal existence that required careful preparation and substantial resources. This belief created a civilization obsessed with burial, where a significant portion of the population's energy and wealth was devoted to preparing for the afterlife. The result was a landscape dotted with cemeteries, from simple pit graves for the poor to elaborate tomb complexes for the wealthy. And powerful. Let your imagination carry you back to the Old Kingdom, around 2500 BCE, when Egypt was at the height of its pyramid-building era. While the Great Pyramids of Giza dominate our modern perception of this period, they were merely the most visible representatives of a vast network of burial sites that stretched across Egypt's western desert. Each pyramid was surrounded by smaller mastaba tombs, flat-topped rectangular structures that housed the remains of nobles, officials, and wealthy merchants. These mastaba fields were cities in their own right, with streets laid out in careful patterns and tomb chapels decorated with scenes of daily life. So detailed, they serve as our primary source of information about Old Kingdom society. The tomb of Ti at Saqqara, for instance, contains reliefs showing servants brewing beer, fishermen casting nets in the Nile, and farmers harvesting grain, a comprehensive record of economic life in ancient Egypt. But for every tomb like Ti's that survives today, dozens of others have vanished without a trace. The limestone blocks that formed their walls were too valuable to leave unused, and over the centuries, they were quarried by later builders who saw ancient tombs as convenient sources of ready-cut stone. Entire necropolises were systematically dismantled, their blocks recycled into new construction projects, their decorated walls broken up and scattered. The desert itself conspired in this destruction. Egypt's western desert is not the stable, unchanging landscape it appears to be. Sand dunes shift with the wind, burying structures for centuries before exposing them again to the elements. Flash floods, rare but devastating, can carve new channels through burial grounds, washing away tombs that survived millennia of gradual erosion. The very dryness that preserves organic materials in Egyptian tombs also makes limestone brittle, causing decorated walls to crumble into dust. Consider the lost necropolis of Dashur, located about 25 miles south of Cairo. Today, visitors see the famous Bent Pyramid and Red Pyramid of Snuffru, impressive monuments that mark this as one of Egypt's most important royal burial grounds. But these pyramids once stood at the center of a vast cemetery that extended for miles across the desert, filled with the tombs of nobles and officials, who served the Old Kingdom. Pharaohs. Archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed the ghostly outlines of hundreds of structures buried beneath the sand. Some are small mastaba tombs. Others are larger complexes with multiple chambers and courtyards. A few appear to be pyramid complexes in their own right, perhaps built for forgotten princes or queens whose names have been lost to history. The tantalizing glimpses provided by modern technology only hint at what lies beneath. In 1993, archaeologists excavating at Dashur discovered an intact burial chamber belonging to a previously unknown princess named Aita. Her tomb contained jewelry of stunning beauty, gold and silver pieces inlaid with precious stones, creating patterns that seemed to capture the light of the eternal stars. The discovery raised profound questions. If such treasures could survive undetected for over 4,000 years, what other wonders remain hidden in Egypt's lost necropolises? The Middle Kingdom, spanning roughly 2055 to 1650 BCE, saw a democratization of burial practices that created even more extensive cemeteries. While Old Kingdom tombs were largely restricted to the royal family and highest nobility, Middle Kingdom Egypt witnessed the rise of a merchant class wealthy enough to afford elaborate burials. Regional governors, successful traders, and skilled craftsmen all built tombs that, while smaller than royal monuments, were often richly decorated and filled with grave goods. This period saw the development of rock-cut tombs, burial chambers carved directly into cliff faces or hillsides. The cliffs at Beni Hasan, about 150 miles south of Cairo, preserve some of the finest examples of Middle Kingdom tomb decoration, with painted scenes showing daily life in remarkable detail. But Beni Hasan is just one of dozens of similar sites that once dotted the Nile Valley, and many others have been lost to quarrying, erosion, and the expansion of modern cities. The lost necropolis of Lisht, near the Middle Kingdom capital of Ichtai, presents a particularly poignant example of archaeological loss. Once the burial ground for the pharaohs Amenhotep I and Senusret I, along with hundreds of their courtiers and officials, Lisht was systematically quarried during the New Kingdom period. The stone from its pyramids and mastaba tombs was transported north to build the temples of Pi-Ramesses, the capital city of Ramesses I today. Lisht's royal pyramids survive only as shapeless mounds of rubble, their original form barely discernible. But beneath the modern village that has grown up around the site, archaeologists have discovered evidence of a vast cemetery that once rivaled the great necropolises of Memphis. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a network of underground chambers and passages, many of them still sealed and unexplored. The New Kingdom brought changes to burial practices that created some of Egypt's most famous cemeteries, but also led to the loss of many others. The Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs from Thutmose I to Ramesses XI were buried, represents the pinnacle of Egyptian tomb construction. But the Valley of the Kings was just one of several royal burial grounds used during the New Kingdom, and others have fared less well. The Valley of the Queens, where royal wives and princes were buried, has suffered significant damage from flash floods and modern tourism. Many of its tombs were damaged beyond repair when a sudden flood in 1994 filled burial chambers with mud and debris. The tomb of Nefertari, Ramesses II's beloved queen, required millions of dollars in conservation work to save its painted walls from complete destruction. Even more tragic is the fate of the Memphite necropolis, a vast cemetery complex that served Egypt's ancient capital for over 3,000 years. Stretching from Abu Rawash in the north to Dashur in the south, this necropolis once contained more tombs than any other site in Egypt. Today, much of it lies beneath the modern city of Cairo and its sprawling suburbs, lost forever to urban development. The search for lost necropolises has become one of the most exciting areas of modern Egyptology. Satellite imagery reveals anomalies in the desert landscape that may mark the locations of buried tomb complexes. Ground penetrating. Radar can detect underground chambers without the need for excavation. Even more remarkably, analysis of ancient papyri has revealed references to burial sites that modern archaeologists had never suspected existed. One such discovery was made in 2017, when archaeologists following clues from ancient texts discovered a lost necropolis near the village of Minya, about 150 miles south of Cairo. The site, which dates to the late period of Egyptian history, contains dozens of rock-cut tombs filled with mummies and grave goods. Many of the tombs show evidence of reuse over several centuries, with later burials placed alongside earlier ones in a touching display of continuity with the past. But perhaps the most intriguing lost necropolis is one that may not yet have been found. Ancient texts refer to a burial ground called the Place of Truth, where the workers who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings were themselves buried. This necropolis, if it could be located, would provide invaluable insights into the lives of the craftsmen who created some of ancient Egypt's greatest artistic achievements. The workers who built the royal tombs lived in a village called Deir al-Medina, located in a desert valley near the Valley of the Kings. This village has been extensively excavated, revealing intimate details of daily life in a community dedicated to serving the dead. We know the names of many villagers, their family relationships, their disputes with neighbors, even their shopping lists preserved on limestone flakes called OSTRACA. But while we know where these workers lived, the location of their necropolis remains a mystery. Ancient records make it clear that the village had its own cemetery, and that burials there were sometimes quite elaborate. The workers, after all, were among the most skilled craftsmen in Egypt, and they had access to fine materials and artistic expertise. Their tombs would have been miniature masterpieces, scaled-down versions of the royal tombs they spent their lives creating. Some archaeologists believe the workers' necropolis lies in the hills overlooking Deir el-Medina, but decades of searching have failed to locate it. Others suggest it may be hidden beneath a later cemetery, or that it was destroyed during one of the periods of civil unrest that periodically swept through Egypt. The mystery remains unsolved, a tantalizing reminder of how much of ancient Egypt's archaeological heritage has been lost to time. The loss of Egypt's necropolises represents more than just the disappearance of ancient monuments. Each tomb was a repository of information about the past, containing not just human remains, but also objects, texts, and decorations that illuminate ancient Egyptian society. When a tomb is destroyed, whether by natural forces or human activity, irreplaceable information is lost forever. Consider what we've learned from the tombs that do survive. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered intact in 1922, revolutionized our understanding of New Kingdom royal burial practices. The tomb's contents, over 5,000 individual objects, provided insights into ancient Egyptian craftsmanship, religious beliefs, and daily life that would have been impossible to obtain from any other source. But Tutankhamun was a minor pharaoh who died young and was buried in a relatively small tomb. Imagine what treasures must have been lost when the great tombs of Ramesses II or Amenhotep III were plundered in antiquity. These pharaohs ruled for decades, accumulated vast wealth, and were buried with all the ceremony due to divine kings. Their tombs would have contained collections that made Tutankhamun's burial goods seem modest by comparison. The systematic looting of Egypt's tombs began in antiquity and continues today. Even during the pharaonic period, tomb robbery was a persistent problem. Papyrus records from the reign of Ramesses I describe trials of tomb robbers who had broken into royal burials in the Valley of the Kings, stealing gold and precious objects that were sold to corrupt officials. The robbers' own testimony, preserved in these ancient court records, provides chilling details of their crimes and the methods they used to penetrate even the most secure tombs. But ancient tomb robbers were motivated by immediate gain. They took portable objects of obvious value and left behind bulky items like sarcophagi and decorated walls. Modern looting is often more systematic and destructive. Entire tomb walls are cut out and sold to private collectors, removing not just valuable artifacts, but also the archaeological context that gives them meaning. The lost necropolis of Saqqara provides a sobering example of ongoing archaeological destruction. While the most famous monuments at Saqqara are protected and regularly monitored, the vast cemetery extends far beyond the tourist areas into zones where security is minimal. Illegal excavations, often conducted at night with heavy machinery, have destroyed countless tombs and scattered their contents across the international antiquities market. Egyptian authorities, working with international partners, have made significant efforts to combat tomb looting and preserve the country's archaeological heritage. New laws impose severe penalties on those caught trafficking in antiquities, and advanced monitoring systems help protect major sites. But the challenge is enormous. Egypt contains more archaeological sites than any other country, and many are located in remote areas where constant surveillance is impossible. The role of climate change in the destruction of Egypt's archaeological heritage is only beginning to be understood. Rising groundwater levels, caused by changes in Nile River management and increased irrigation, threaten tombs that survived millennia in the dry desert environment. Salt crystallization, a process accelerated by fluctuating humidity levels, is causing decorated tomb walls to crumble at an alarming rate. The tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, considered one of the finest examples of royal tomb decoration, has suffered severe damage from salt crystallization and water infiltration. Despite extensive conservation efforts, sections of the tomb's painted walls have been lost forever, their colors fading and their plaster falling away in irreversible decay. Yet for all the destruction and loss, new discoveries continue to remind us of the wonders that still lie hidden beneath Egypt's sands. In 2019, archaeologists announced the discovery of a previously unknown necropolis near the Giza Pyramid complex. The site, which dates to the Old Kingdom period, contains dozens of rock-cut tombs with well-preserved decorations and inscriptions. One tomb in particular captured worldwide attention, the burial place of a priest named Wadi, whose tomb walls are covered with colorful scenes showing religious rituals and daily life. The tomb's main chamber contains a statue of Wadi himself, carved from limestone and painted with pigments that retain their original brightness after more than 4,000 years. The discovery of Wadi's tomb reminds us that even at Egypt's most famous archaeological sites, new wonders await discovery. If such treasures can survive undetected just yards from the Great Pyramid, what secrets might be hidden in the vast expanses of desert that have never been systematically explored? Modern technology offers new hope for locating and protecting Egypt's lost necropolises. Satellite imagery can detect subtle variations in desert topography that mark the locations of buried structures. Drone surveys can cover vast areas quickly and safely, identifying promising sites for future excavation. Most importantly, digital documentation allows archaeologists to create permanent records of tomb decorations and inscriptions, preserving them for future generations, even if the originals are lost to decay or destruction. The Egypt Exploration Society, working with Egyptian authorities, has launched ambitious projects to survey and document threatened archaeological sites throughout the country. Their work has revealed hundreds of previously unknown tombs and burial grounds, many of them in urgent need of conservation work. But perhaps the most important development is the growing recognition that Egypt's archaeological heritage belongs not just to Egyptologists and museum visitors, but to all humanity. The stories preserved in ancient tombs, stories of love and loss, ambition and failure, faith and doubt, speak to universal human experiences that transcend the boundaries of time and culture. As you imagine yourself walking through one of these lost necropolises, perhaps in the early morning light when the desert air is still cool and the sand shows no footprints but your own, you become part of this continuing story. The tomb walls around you whisper of lives lived thousands of years ago, of hopes and dreams that echo your own, of the eternal human desire to be remembered after death. In the end, the greatest tragedy of Egypt's lost necropolises is not the destruction of gold and precious stones, but the silencing of these ancient voices. Each lost tomb represents dozens of individual stories: the pharaoh who built it, the craftsmen who decorated it, the priests who maintained it, the family members who visited it to honor their dead. When these tombs vanish, so do the stories. They were built to preserve. Yet, even in destruction, there is a kind of continuity. The stones quarried from ancient tombs were used to build new structures, carrying forward the work of ancient craftsmen in new forms. The knowledge gained from excavating even damaged tombs adds to our understanding of the past. And the ongoing search for lost necropolises continues to reveal new chapters in the long story of human civilization. As sleep approaches, let your mind rest on this image: a vast necropolis stretching across the desert under a canopy of stars. Its tombs filled with the dreams and aspirations of people who lived and died millennia ago. Some of these tombs have been lost to time, their occupants forgotten, but others wait patiently beneath the sand, ready to share their secrets with future generations of explorers and dreamers. In the silence of the desert night, you could almost hear the whispers of the past, the voices of ancient Egyptians calling across the centuries to remind us that death is not the end of the story, but merely its transformation from one form to another. Their tombs may vanish, but their legacy endures in every new discovery, every conservation effort, every moment of wonder felt by those who encounter the surviving treasures of ancient Egypt. Asterisk, as the night deepens and your mind settles into the rhythm of ancient Egypt, let your thoughts turn from the silent tombs of the dead to the bustling temples of the living. Here, in the shadow of towering pylons and beneath gilded ceilings, another kind of power flourished, one that would eventually challenge the pharaohs themselves for control of the ancient world's greatest civilization. Imagine yourself standing in the vast courtyard of Karnak Temple at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight strike the golden tips of the obelisks and illuminate the forest of columns that stretches beyond sight. The air is thick with incense and the sound of chanting drifts from the inner sanctuaries where priests perform the daily rituals that maintain the cosmic order. But these are not merely religious ceremonies. They are displays of political power that would make any pharaoh take notice. The story of how Egypt's priests came to wield influence that rivaled royal authority begins with Amun, a relatively minor deity who rose to become king of the gods. Originally worshipped only in Thebes, Amun was a god of air and wind, invisible but omnipresent, his name meaning the hidden one. But as Theban pharaohs rose to power during the Middle Kingdom, they elevated their local god to national prominence, eventually merging him with Ra, the ancient sun god, to create Amun-Ra, supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon. With divine promotion came earthly wealth. Each victorious pharaoh donated a portion of his spoils to Amun's temples, expressing gratitude for divine favor in battle. When Thutmose III returned from his campaigns in the Levant, laden with tribute from conquered cities, vast quantities of gold, silver, and precious stones flowed into Amun's treasuries. A single military campaign might yield enough wealth to fund temple construction projects for decades. The temple complex at Karnak, Amun's primary seat of worship, grew with each royal donation until it became the largest religious complex in the ancient world. Its main temple alone covered over 200 acres, with halls capable of holding thousands of worshippers. The hypostyle hall, begun under Seti I and completed by Rameses II, contained 134 massive columns arranged in 16 rows, creating a stone forest that inspired awe in every visitor. The ceiling, painted blue and decorated with golden stars, represented the heavens themselves resting on pillars of stone. But temples were more than architectural marvels. They were economic powerhouses that controlled vast resources throughout Egypt. The priests of Amun administered not only the temple complex itself, but also the extensive estates that supported it. These holdings included agricultural land throughout the Nile Valley, workshops where craftsmen produced goods for temple use and trade, and even entire towns whose inhabitants worked exclusively for the temple's benefit. The daily administration of this religious empire required a bureaucracy as complex as that of the pharaoh himself. At its head stood the high priest of Amun, a position that became increasingly hereditary as powerful families consolidated their control over temple resources. Below him ranged dozens of specialized priests, those who performed daily rituals, those who administered temple estates, those who supervised craft workshops, and those who managed trade relationships with foreign lands. Consider the career of Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who served as high priest of Amun under Amenhotep III during the height of the New Kingdom. Born into a family of modest means in a provincial town, Amenhotep distinguished himself through intelligence and administrative skill, eventually rising to become one of the most powerful men in Egypt. His tomb inscriptions describe a life spent managing temple resources, overseeing construction projects, and advising the pharaoh on matters both religious and secular. Amenhotep's daily routine illustrates the complex responsibilities of high temple officials. He rose before dawn to participate in the morning rituals that awakened the god Amun and prepared him for the day ahead. These ceremonies were elaborate affairs involving multiple priests, expensive offerings of food and drink, and the ritual dressing of the god's statue in fresh clothing and jewelry. The god's breakfast alone might include dozens of loaves of bread, joints of roasted meat, jars of beer and wine, and expensive delicacies imported from distant lands. After the morning rituals, Amenhotep's attention turned to administrative matters. Reports arrived from temple estates throughout Egypt, detailing crop yields, tax collections, and personnel issues. Overseers of temple workshops presented samples of goods produced for religious ceremonies or trade, golden jewelry for adorning, divine statues, fine linen for wrapping sacred objects, precious oils and perfumes for ritual use. The temple also served as Egypt's largest employer outside the royal administration. Thousands of people worked directly for Amun's temples, priests and priestesses of various ranks, scribes who maintained detailed records, craftsmen who created religious objects, farmers who worked temple lands, and servants who maintained the vast complex. Many more depended indirectly on temple activities: merchants who traded temple goods, builders who worked on constant construction projects, and suppliers who provided everything from food to precious metals. This economic power translated directly into political influence. When pharaohs needed resources for military campaigns or construction projects, they often found themselves negotiating with temple officials who controlled significant portions of Egypt's wealth. The priests of Amun were not merely religious figures, they were bankers, landlords, and political power brokers whose support could make or break a pharaoh's ambitious plans. The relationship between royal and priestly power was usually symbiotic, but it was not without tension. Pharaohs understood that their divine legitimacy depended on priestly recognition, but they also resented the growing independence of temple hierarchies. This tension reached a breaking point during the reign of Akhenaten, who attempted to revolutionize Egyptian religion, and in the process, break the power of Amun's priesthood. Akhenaten's religious revolution, which promoted worship of the sun. Disk-Aten above all other gods, was as much a political coup as a spiritual transformation. By establishing a new capital at Amarna and promoting a new god with new priests, Akhenaten attempted to bypass the traditional power structures that had grown up around Amun's worship. The priests of Amun found themselves suddenly marginalized, their temples closed, their god's name chiseled from monuments throughout Egypt. But Akhenaten's revolution died with him, and the priests of Amun orchestrated a remarkable comeback. When the boy king Tutankhamun ascended the throne, real power lay in the hands of advisors closely connected to Amun's priesthood. The restoration of traditional religion that marked Tutankhamun's reign was largely orchestrated by priests eager to reclaim their lost influence and wealth. The inscriptions from Tutankhamun's restoration stela reveal the extent of the priests' triumph. Amun's temples were rebuilt and re-endowed, their priesthoods restored to full status, their rituals resumed with even greater splendor than before. The young pharaoh, probably speaking words written by priestly advisors, proclaimed his dedication to the gods and promised never again to neglect their proper worship. As the new kingdom progressed, the wealth and power of Amun's priesthood continued to grow. Under Ramesses II, temple construction reached unprecedented scales, with massive additions to Karnak and the construction of entirely new temple complexes throughout Egypt. Each new temple required its own staff of priests, its own economic support system, its own share of royal donations and provincial taxes. The daily life of an ordinary priest in this vast religious bureaucracy was far removed from the austere spirituality often associated with religious service. Priests were typically married men with families to support, and priestly positions were often hereditary, passed from father to son like any other profession. Many priests served the temple only part-time, spending just a few months each year in active religious service while pursuing other occupations during their off-duty periods. These part-time priests, known as web priests, formed the backbone of Egypt's religious establishment. During their months of temple service, they participated in daily rituals, maintained temple buildings and equipment, and helped administer the complex economic activities that supported religious life. When their service period ended, they returned to their regular professions as farmers, craftsmen, or scribes, but they retained their connection to the temple and their share in its economic benefits. The contrast between the lifestyle of high temple officials and ordinary priests was as stark as that between pharaoh and peasant. While a high priest of Amun might live in a mansion filled with luxury goods and attended by dozens of servants, an ordinary web priest might struggle to support his family on the modest payments and food rations he received for his temple service. Yet, even ordinary priests possessed a social status that set them apart from Egypt's common people. They were literate in a largely illiterate society, capable of reading the complex religious texts that governed temple ceremonies. They had access to temple libraries containing thousands of papyrus scrolls covering subjects from medicine to astronomy. Most importantly, they were believed to possess spiritual power, the ability to intercede with the gods on behalf of ordinary worshippers. This spiritual authority translated into practical influence in Egyptian communities throughout the country. Local priests served as healers, advisors, and mediators in disputes. They performed the ceremonies that marked important transitions in people's lives: births, marriages, deaths. They maintained the local temples that served as community centers, providing not only religious services, but also economic opportunities and social connections. The religious calendar that governed Egyptian life was administered by priests who determined the proper times for festivals, agricultural activities, and important ceremonies. The flooding of the Nile, crucial for Egypt's agricultural prosperity, was predicted by priest astronomers who observed the rising of Sirius and other celestial events. Even the pharaoh's coronation could not proceed without priestly participation and blessing. But perhaps the most significant source of priestly power was their role as intermediaries between the living and the dead. Egyptian religious beliefs emphasized the importance of proper burial and continued care for the deceased, services that required priestly participation. Wealthy families paid substantial sums to ensure that priests would perform the necessary rituals to guarantee their loved one's successful journey to the afterlife. The mortuary temples associated with royal pyramids and tombs required permanent staff to maintain daily offerings and perform regular ceremonies for deceased pharaohs. These temple complexes became major economic centers in their own right, controlling vast agricultural estates and employing hundreds of workers. The pyramid complex of Sneferu at Dashur, for example, supported 2 complete mortuary temples, each with its own staff of priests and administrators. As Egypt entered the later New Kingdom period, the political influence of Amun's priesthood reached its zenith. The high priests of Amun began to rival pharaohs in wealth and authority, sometimes intermarrying with the royal family and claiming quasi-royal prerogatives. Their tombs, though not equal to those of pharaohs, displayed a magnificence that would have been unthinkable for non-royal individuals in earlier periods. The tomb of Ramesses in Thebes, a high priest of Amun who served under Ramesses XI, illustrates the heights of priestly power and privilege. The tomb's decorated chambers depict scenes of religious ceremonies in which Ramesses appears as the equal of the pharaoh himself, offering to the gods and receiving their blessings. The burial chamber contained grave goods worthy of a king, golden jewelry, precious amulets, and fine furniture that demonstrated the accumulated wealth of generations of priestly service. This concentration of power in priestly hands eventually contributed to the fragmentation of royal authority that marked the end of the New Kingdom. When central government weakened during the reigns of later Ramessid pharaohs, regional priests stepped into the power vacuum, assuming administrative responsibilities that had traditionally belonged to royal officials. In some areas, high priests of Amun functioned as de facto rulers, collecting taxes, maintaining order, and even conducting diplomatic relations with foreign powers. The ultimate triumph of priestly power came during the 21st dynasty, when the high priests of Amun at Thebes established an independent kingdom in Upper Egypt, while pharaohs continued to rule in the north from Tanis. For over a century, Egypt was effectively divided between royal authority in the delta and priestly authority in the south, with the high priests of Amun claiming pharaonic titles and prerogatives. This division of Egypt between competing power centers illustrates the fundamental challenge that priestly wealth and influence posed to pharaonic authority. The priests of Amun had become so powerful that they could challenge the pharaohs themselves, yet they remained dependent on the religious system that justified royal rule. The result was a complex balance of power in which neither side could completely dominate the other. The daily routine in the great temple of Karnak during this period of priestly supremacy would have been a magnificent spectacle. Hundreds of priests of various ranks participated in elaborate ceremonies that consumed vast quantities of expensive offerings. The god Amun was treated like a living pharaoh, awakened each morning with hymns and incense, dressed in fine linen and precious jewelry, and presented with meals fit for a king. The temple's workshops produced luxury goods that rivaled anything created for the royal court. Golden vessels for religious ceremonies, intricate jewelry for adorning divine statues, fine furniture for temple chambers, and elaborate ceremonial objects used in religious processions. The temple's scriptorium employed dozens of scribes who copied religious texts, maintained administrative records, and composed hymns and prayers for various ceremonies. Yet beneath the surface, magnificence lay the same human concerns that affected all levels of Egyptian society. Temple records preserve evidence of petty disputes between priests, complaints about inadequate rations, and requests for time off to tend to family matters. Priests worried about providing for their children, securing good marriages for their daughters, and ensuring their own comfortable retirement. This period saw the development of rock-cut tombs, burial chambers carved directly into cliff faces or hillsides. The cliffs at Beni Hasan, about 150 miles south of Cairo, preserve some of the finest examples of Middle Kingdom tomb decoration, with painted scenes showing daily life in remarkable detail. But Beni Hasan is just one of dozens of similar sites that once dotted the Nile Valley, and many others have been lost to quarrying, erosion, and the expansion of modern cities. The lost necropolis of Lisht, near the Middle Kingdom capital of Ichtai, presents a particularly poignant example of archaeological loss. Once the burial ground for the pharaohs Amenhotep I and Senusret I, along with hundreds of their courtiers and officials, Lisht was systematically quarried during the New Kingdom period. The stone from its pyramids and mastaba tombs was transported north to build the temples of Pi-Ramesses, the capital city of Ramesses I today. Lisht's royal pyramids survive only as shapeless mounds of rubble, their original form barely discernible. But beneath the modern village that has grown up around the site, archaeologists have discovered evidence of a vast cemetery that once rivaled the great necropolises of Memphis. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a network of underground chambers and passages, many of them still sealed and unexplored. The New Kingdom brought changes to burial practices that created some of Egypt's most famous cemeteries, but also led to the loss of many others. The Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs from Thutmose I to Ramesses XI were buried, represents the pinnacle of Egyptian tomb construction. But the Valley of the Kings was just one of several royal burial grounds used during the New Kingdom, and others have fared less well. The Valley of the Queens, where royal wives and princes were buried, has suffered significant damage from flash, floods, and modern tourism. Many of its tombs were damaged beyond repair when a sudden flood in 1994 filled burial chambers with mud and debris. The tomb of Nefertari, Ramesses II's beloved queen, required millions of dollars in conservation work to save its painted walls from complete destruction. Even more tragic is the fate of the Memphite necropolis, a vast cemetery complex that served Egypt's ancient capital for over 3,000 years. Stretching from Abu Rawash in the north to Dashur in the south, this necropolis once contained more tombs than any other site in Egypt. Today, much of it lies beneath the modern city of Cairo and its sprawling suburbs, lost forever to urban development. The search for lost necropolises has become one of the most exciting areas of modern Egyptology. Satellite imagery reveals anomalies in the desert landscape that may mark the locations of buried tomb complexes. Ground penetrating. Radar can detect underground chambers without the need for excavation. Even more remarkably, analysis of ancient papyri has revealed references to burial sites that modern archaeologists had never suspected existed. One such discovery was made in 2017 when archaeologists following clues from ancient texts discovered a lost necropolis near the village of Minya, about 150 miles south of Cairo. The site, which dates to the late period of Egyptian history, contains dozens of rock-cut tombs filled with mummies and grave goods. Many of the tombs show evidence of reuse over several centuries, with later burials placed alongside earlier ones in a touching display of continuity with the past. But perhaps the most intriguing lost necropolis is one that may not yet have been found. Ancient texts refer to a burial ground called the Place of Truth, where the workers who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings were themselves buried. This necropolis, if it could be located, would provide invaluable insights into the lives of the craftsmen who created some of ancient Egypt's greatest artistic achievements. The workers who built the royal tombs lived in a village called Deir Medina, located in a desert valley near the Valley of the Kings. This village has been extensively excavated, revealing intimate details of daily life in a community dedicated to serving the dead. We know the names of many villagers, their family relationships, their disputes with neighbors, even their shopping lists preserved on limestone flakes called OSTRACA. But while we know where these workers lived, the location of their necropolis remains a mystery. Ancient records make it clear that the village had its own cemetery, and that burials there were sometimes quite elaborate. The workers, after all, were among the most skilled craftsmen in Egypt, and they had access to fine materials and artistic expertise. Their tombs would have been miniature masterpieces, scaled-down versions of the royal tombs they spent their lives creating. Some archaeologists believe the workers' necropolis lies in the hills overlooking Deir el-Medina, but decades of searching have failed to locate it. Others suggest it may be hidden beneath a later cemetery, or that it was destroyed during one of the periods of civil unrest that periodically swept through Egypt. The mystery remains unsolved, a tantalizing reminder of how much of ancient Egypt's archaeological heritage has been lost to time. The loss of Egypt's necropolises represents more than just the disappearance of ancient monuments. Each tomb was a repository of information about the past, containing not just human remains, but also objects, texts, and decorations that illuminate ancient Egyptian society. When a tomb is destroyed, whether by natural forces or human activity, irreplaceable information is lost forever. Consider what we've learned from the tombs that do survive. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered intact in 1922, revolutionized our understanding of New Kingdom royal burial practices. The tomb's contents, over 5,000 individual objects, provided insights into ancient Egyptian craftsmanship, religious beliefs, and daily life that would have been impossible to obtain from any other source. But Tutankhamun was a minor pharaoh who died young and was buried in a relatively small tomb. Imagine what treasures must have been lost when the great tombs of Ramesses II or Amenhotep III were plundered in antiquity. These pharaohs ruled for decades, accumulated vast wealth, and were buried with all the ceremony due to divine kings. Their tombs would have contained collections that made Tutankhamun's burial goods seem modest by comparison. The systematic looting of Egypt's tombs began in antiquity and continues today. Even during the pharaonic period, tomb robbery was a persistent problem. Papyrus records from the reign of Ramesses I describe trials of tomb robbers who had broken into royal burials in the Valley of the Kings, stealing gold and precious objects that were sold to corrupt officials. The robbers' own testimony, preserved in these ancient court records, provides chilling details of their crimes and the methods they used to penetrate even the most secure tombs. But ancient tomb robbers were motivated by immediate gain. They took portable objects of obvious value and left behind bulky items like sarcophagi and decorated walls. Modern looting is often more systematic and destructive. Entire tomb walls are cut out and sold to private collectors, removing not just valuable artifacts, but also the archaeological context that gives them meaning. The lost necropolis of Saqqara provides a sobering example of ongoing archaeological destruction. While the most famous monuments at Saqqara are protected and regularly monitored, a vast cemetery extends far beyond the tourist areas into zones where security is minimal. Illegal excavations, often conducted at night with heavy machinery, have destroyed countless tombs and scattered their contents across the international antiquities market. Egyptian authorities, working with international partners, have made significant efforts to combat tomb looting and preserve the country's archaeological heritage. New laws impose severe penalties on those caught trafficking in antiquities, and advanced monitoring systems help protect major sites. But the challenge is enormous. Egypt contains more archaeological sites than any other country, and many are located in remote areas where constant surveillance is impossible. The role of climate change in the destruction of Egypt's archaeological heritage is only beginning to be understood. Rising groundwater levels, caused by changes in Nile River management and increased irrigation, threaten tombs that survived millennia in the dry desert environment. Salt crystallization, a process accelerated by fluctuating humidity levels, is causing decorated tomb walls to crumble at an alarming rate. The tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, considered one of the finest examples of royal tomb decoration, has suffered severe damage from salt crystallization and water infiltration. Despite extensive conservation efforts, sections of the tomb's painted walls have been lost forever, their colors fading and their plaster falling away in irreversible decay. Yet for all the destruction and loss, new discoveries continue to remind us of the wonders that still lie hidden beneath Egypt's sands. In 2019, archaeologists announced the discovery of a previously unknown necropolis near the Giza Pyramid complex. The site, which dates to the Old Kingdom period, contains dozens of rock-cut tombs with well-preserved decorations and inscriptions.